Welcome to the Green Room, where we explore the environmental issues that green up our world. PFAS is an acronym for a group of man-made chemicals that have been found in drinking water all over the world. Unfortunately, Ann Arbor is one of the 119 municipal systems in Michigan that have tested positive for PFAS. Today we'll be talking with Brian Stieglitz, the manager of water treatment services for the City of Ann Arbor, about what we do know and what we don't know about this emerging problem. Welcome to the show, Brian.
Thank you.
So since there's so much territory we need to cover, I propose that I give a little whirlwind tour of the history of the problem. You can stop me if I say anything wrong or whatever, but and then we'll get into the Ann Arbor situation.
Okay.
Sound good? Okay, so I'm not sure if I can say this, but PFAS stands for, and help me here, per and
Fluoroalkyl substances.
Okay, great. And there's something like 3,000 or 4,000 chemicals in this class?
Yep, that's true.
Oh my gosh, it's amazing. And they started being used back in the 1950s, am I right? I guess 3M discontinued use of two of them, PFOS and PFOA, back in 2000, okay? And the US restricted PFOS in 2007. But PFOS and PFOA are still being produced in China, so these goods with it can be imported still into our country, right?
That's true.
Okay, so are substitutes necessarily better?
Something that we're still studying and learning, so hard to answer that question. There's a lot of research that is being done in that area to answer that very question.
I've heard that Gen X, which is one of the substitutes, it could be worse, but we don't have that in Ann Arbor water, right?
That's correct. We're fortunate not to have that chemical in our water.
Great. So what kind of products is it in?
It's in things we use every day. It's in on our jackets in Gore-Tex. It's in our pans. It's a part of Teflon, so non-stick surfaces. It's in dental floss that people are using. It's on food wrappers that are used in fast food restaurants. So it's Scotchgard is another chemical that has these compounds in it. So it's
furniture and carpeting.
Furniture. So we're exposed to these things in a lot of our activities every day.
I've heard it's even in like personal care products, like some shampoos and lotions and insecticides. Well, of course, there's firefighting foam. We hear about that a lot.
Yes, it's in firefighting foam too. I mean, it's used in all these products because the properties are, they're called these miracle chemicals, and they do such a good job at what they do that they're just proliferate, and they're used in so many things that we use every day. The ability to, not have water soak into your clothes, so it sheds water.
Shed stains.
Shed stains, exactly.
And maybe that has something to do with why it rises into foam on, like, for instance, the Huron River, you'll see foam.
So it's a surfactant, so yes, it likes to live in that foam state.
And where do we find it in our environment, like in groundwater?
So in the state of Michigan, it appears in groundwater in several portions of the state. On the west side of the state, where Wolverine that makes boots, and they use it as a waterproofing agent. There's some contaminated groundwater out there, and that's associated with some water systems whose source water was contaminated. In our side of the state, and in Ann Arbor in particular, in our watershed, it's in the Huron River. So we're seeing it in our surface water, and it's because there are actively plating manufacturers who are using these products as a demisting agent. So it's for worker protection. When you're plating, you're creating these concentrated heavy metal mists, which are hazardous to the workers. So these PFAS chemicals are used as mist suppressants to protect the workers from inhaling these heavy metal fumes.
So that's like an exemption, right? The law allows that because it's safe.
That's my understanding, and that there's not a substitute that's capable of performing as effectively.
I've heard it used to be anyway, the sludge from wastewater treatment plants was spread on agricultural fields. So there's worries that it's gotten into food.
Yeah, I'm not exactly familiar with that. That's not my area of expertise. But if it's in water from plating manufacturers that are going to municipal wastewater treatment plants, then you know it's going to be in the sludge that they're removing from the water that they're treating.
So these kind of processes are going on all over the world, I guess. And for instance, in Michigan, they think about 2 million people are being affected. And estimates are that PFAS in blood is in almost all people in the U.S., but that's decreasing over time, you told me the other day, which is great. It bioaccumulates in animals so that it's even found in the Arctic, and so the bigger animals that eat other animals like polar bears and seals, it's found in their blood. And occupational exposure is the highest, so that makes sense that workers that work in these plants are going to, have more of a risk. So what are the health impacts that they're discovering?
Again, that's not my area of expertise, but from what I've read, some health impacts associated with exposure to these chemicals would be increased cholesterol. There are some increased risks of certain cancers, depending upon the level of exposure. It also impacts the immune system. So there are several health impacts.
And the Center for Disease Control, the CDC, issued a federal health advisory. When did they do that, and what was the level?
In 2017, they issued a health advisory for 2 of these compounds. 2 of the ones you've already mentioned, the PFOS and PFOA. Let's use the acronyms because I agree the chemical names are hard to say. And it's the combined total of those 2. So you add the concentrations of both of them together, and if the level is below 70 parts per trillion, then they consider that safe. And 70 parts per trillion is a nanogram, very, very small amount. To give you an idea of what that is, and sort of maybe an analogy, 1 part per trillion would be considered 1 drop of water in 20 Olympic-sized swimming pools. So we're able to detect these chemicals now at very, very low concentrations.
And when did Ann Arbor first notice it in the water?
So in 2014 was the first time we tested for these compounds, and it was part of a regulatory requirement. EPA every few years issues a rule where utilities need to test for emerging contaminants, things that there's not a lot of information on, but they want to do some research and figure out how do these chemicals proliferate among utilities around the country. So that was back in 2014.
And what was the level found back then?
I believe it was in the low 40s, maybe 43 parts per trillion of the 2 PFOS and PFOA combined.
So that's under the 70 parts per trillion advisory, but there are some scientists coming out now saying it should be lower. So it's a concern, and Ann Arbor's addressing it. What is Ann Arbor doing?
So in 2017, we began piloting a new type of material in our filters. So we have 26 filters at our water treatment plant. And there is media in the filters, sand and granular activated carbon, that is used to remove pathogens and particulate from the water. Well, it turns out the carbon is very effective at removing these PFAS chemicals. And there are certain types of carbon that are better suited to do that than others. So again, in 2017, we piloted a new type of carbon, and we did that for about 9 months, and we found it to be very effective at removing the PFOS and PFOA. So later on in that year, or in 2018, staff went to council recommending the replacement of all of the carbon in all of the filters with this new carbon material that's effective at removing PFAS, and we're in the process of implementing that right now. We're finding that we can get non-detectable levels, so below the detection limit. The detection limit is 2 parts per trillion of PFOS and PFOA through the new media.
Great.
And we anticipate that we will be finished with replacing all of the carbon in all of the filters in the next few months. We've done about 10 out of the 26 filters already.
Great. And what happens when the carbon fills up? I guess it sticks to these little granules, and apparently it fills up after a while and you have to replace it. What do you do with the ones that are filled up?
So historically, we've been replacing our carbon every 5 years. So we were on this 5-year cycle. We anticipate, because with the new carbon, we're going to be using it for a new purpose, which is removing PFAS, that we're going to have to replace it more frequently. So we're anticipating every 2 or 2.5 years. And when the carbon, you explained it exactly right, the PFAS chemicals adhere to the carbon, and when we wash the filters, the PFAS doesn't come off. So at some point, the space on the carbon, the surface area, is consumed by these chemicals that are attaching, and it needs to be regenerated. So we contract with a company to come in, the manufacturer, and they basically vacuum the carbon out of our filters, and then they take it back to their facility, and then they can regenerate it and then give it back to us. And they do that using like a high temperature, like a kiln, where they heat it up to, I'm not sure, it's in the thousands of degrees, I believe. And then the PFAS are destroyed through that process, and then the carbon can be returned to us and we can reuse it.
It's nice, it can be recycled. So how's it impacting the Huron River?
So we issued, I think it was last year, there was a fish advisory, do not eat fish advisory on the Huron River. Again, you mentioned the whole bioaccumulation component. Because these chemicals don't break down that rapidly, they tend to accumulate in fish and other species. So there is a do not eat fish advisory because of the concentrations in fish that the DEQ has collected and measured. It hasn't really impacted recreational use of the river because there's not really a risk associated with dermal contact. So you can canoe, you can recreate in the river, and there's not really an exposure risk. The issue is if you're ingesting or consuming it. So we've also told community members to not eat the foam because we know that
Sounds like a good idea.
that the chemical tends to concentrate in foam. So again, if you're recreating in the river and you get a little water in your mouth, it's not really a risk. The real risk is if you're consuming the foam, and I think that's something that's probably not that commonly done by our residential users.
Okay. And what do we think is the source of the problem in the Huron?
Well, we know from some of the investigation that the state of Michigan has done that there are some plating manufacturers upstream that discharge into the Wixom wastewater treatment plant. So we know that that's one source. They're still investigating. I think that they've identified some others. I'm not that familiar with all of them. But at least one of the plating manufacturers that discharges to the Wixom wastewater treatment plant has implemented treatment before they send their, as part of their industrial pretreatment program, and we see that that's been very effective at addressing the PFOS and PFOA. Basically, they're using the same treatment that we're using at the water treatment plant, but it's much more effective, cost-effective to do it at the source.
Yeah.
So we're really happy with the fact that they've taken the initiative to do that.
Good. And how many different PFASs do you test for?
So just recently, we've changed the suite of PFAS chemicals from 21 to 24. So we're currently testing for 24. We post all of those results too on our website so our customers can know what the levels are because there's been obviously a lot of interest. And that suite of chemicals is really identified by the state, and it's changed a little bit over time. So we adjust based on what the technology can do and what the state is recommending that utilities test for.
And how often do you test that?
We're testing right now 2 times per month.
Do you test both the long chain and the short chain? I guess they used to think the long chain was more of a concern, but they're not sure if the short chain is a concern or not.
So the suite of 24 chemicals include both long chain, which is referring to the number of carbons in the molecule.
Okay.
And we consider long chain like 8 carbon molecules, and that's what the PFOS and the PFOA are.
Okay.
The shorter chains that have less carbons, we're also testing for those. And I think from a health perspective, the longer chains take longer to break down in the body, which is why there's currently thought that there's a larger health risk associated with them because they stick around a lot longer and they don't break down as rapidly.
Mm-hmm. And there certainly have been studied more. It sounds like there's just so much to be done in terms of studying all these different chemicals.
Yep, that's true.
So it's really hard to know what we're dealing with exactly. So you told me before that Ann Arbor is helping with the research because this is such a new thing, right? That you're collaborating with institutions to help and sharing the data and such, which is really great.
Yeah, we're about to start a project with North Carolina State. North Carolina State is one of the leaders in the U.S. in studying this. They they've been working with Cape Fear, and Cape Fear is the town in North Carolina where the Gen X plant was. So this is one of the replacement chemicals for the PFOS and PFOA. And they have some drinking water plant contamination issues in that vicinity. So they've been doing a fair bit of work. So we'll be partnering with them. There's some other partners like the Colorado School of Mines, and together we'll be looking at some of the shorter chains and what technologies are effective at removing them. And really the goal of this project is to develop a recipe of options that utilities can use to address these chemicals. We happen to have a pilot filter plant available at our plant. So basically, it's a very small version of our filters, and we can do different things in them, like try new media, different types of filter media, and evaluate the effectiveness without having to put it into the system that's serving our customers. It's sort of on the side. It goes to the drain, so we don't have to worry about whether it's effective or not, because we're doing it in this sort of small scale.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I really commend you for contributing to the body of knowledge. One thing that I know is not in your realm, but boy, would I love to know, is how much the water that we drink is a concern compared to, you listed so many different things in our environment. And like I've heard that even the people who test water, it's almost impossible to make sure that they're not wearing Gore-Tex, that they're not wearing lotion, that they're not, that the bag, on and on and on, because it's on so many things. So, it makes me, I've heard it can be in the air and such. So, since we don't know what levels are really safe, are you recommending people get filters for their water faucets in the home?
We're not recommending that at this point in time. The water treatment plant is using the best available technology pretty much on the market for addressing these. So a lot of people are asking us about home filtration devices, and basically they're considering using the same things that we're already using at the plant. Most of the commercial filter options that are available are not certifying down below the 70 parts per trillion. So we're already achieving below 10 parts per trillion with the technology that we have in the plant.
Okay.
So the home treatment devices are unlikely to provide purer water than we're already delivering to our customers. So we're staying on top of the research, as you mentioned, and we're exceeding all of the regulatory requirements. We're striving to achieve the best, the lowest levels in the United States that even other states that are currently regulating are shooting for. So we're striving to provide the best quality water that's possible to our customers.
Great. And I've heard that bottled water companies don't need to test for it because it's not a legal requirement. So drinking bottled water is no guarantee. Yeah. Yep. So where can people get more information in terms of the Ann Arbor website?
So if they go to the Ann Arbor website, so a2gov.org, www.a2gov.org, there is a sort of a drop down that has sort of these highlights. So it's on the front page of the city's website. They'll see PFAS. If they click on that, it will go to the water portion, and it will describe a lot of the frequently asked questions that we're getting. If people have questions, it's also a link there to the data if they want to know what the most recent data is. And this, as soon as we get the data in, we're posting it to the website. There is a lag because our customers should know that we don't do this analysis in-house. It's a fairly complicated analysis to do, so we need to send it out, and there's about a 3 to 4 week lead time before we get the results. So if people are looking for February data, they're probably not going to see it until the beginning of March, but as soon as we get it in, we're posting it.
Good to know. Well, this has been super interesting, and I really appreciate you coming here today. We're out of time, but thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
For an online archive of all our Green Room shows, please go to washtenaw.org/greenroom. Thanks for joining us in the Green Room.